Imagine waking up one day in the middle of the night. You're laying in bed, everything's dark, and you try to go back to sleep. But suddenly, you begin to feel really weird. As you move, it feels like everything you do is going very quickly. You sit up and look around. It feels almost as if the whole world has accelerated, and every one of your movements also feels weirdly fast and violent. There's also an insistent sound resonating in your brain. It's not a hallucination, you know it's not there, but it feels like a bunch of angry voices are screaming at you. Yet, you can't comprehend what they're saying. You're not actually hearing anything, you can just sense it. As you look around your room, it seems to be shrinking and widening, so you lay down again, but the room feels like it's getting taller and smaller at the same time. The sheets on your bed feel weird too. You can notice the creases and folds more than usual, and your hands also feel strange. It's all very confusing, but even though you can't understand what's going on, you ultimately manage to sleep it off. This is something that actually happens, and it's actually got a name, Tachysensia, and it's a variation of the Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. But wait, I'll explain that in a bit. Before all of that though, hi, my name's Teacup. In this channel I talk about my interests and dive into stuff that I find interesting, and this has actually happened to me. What I described was actually a mix of different memories I have of experiencing this when I was a little kid, probably between 9 to 11 years old. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, like I described, and feeling that weird, feeling for a few minutes. But I had practically forgotten about it, as after 5 years of not having it, it just kind of faded away from my memory. However, a few months ago, I came back from school and was really tired. I had even almost fallen asleep in class that day, so I decided to take a nap. It must have been 2 hours long, as when I woke up it was already nighttime, although my family was still awake, so probably around 7 PM. But I decided to go out to the backyard, just because. As I walked around, I suddenly started to feel really weird, like my pace was quicker than usual, and I started to sense those strange voices again. It took me 5 minutes to go back to normal, but once I did, I finally decided to look it up. I had recognized the feeling, even after not having experienced it for half a decade, so I quickly began to try and find any information about it. At first, very little information came up, so while I'd rather use Google for research purposes, I had to pull out ChatGPT and give it a more detailed description of what had happened, so I could finally find out what it was. And it managed to actually lead me to some articles describing the feeling, but most importantly, a Reddit community called r/fastfeeling. Having around 665 weekly visitors, it's a relatively small community, but I began to read the posts. One made by the user u/spiritualcan3967 reads: This fast feeling. I woke up in the middle of the night with this. I thought I was alone on this, but I see a lot of people have experienced this. Can someone please confirm if I have it? I just woke up and I felt like everything was way bigger than it was. My heartbeat was hard, I stood up to close my computer and I felt it. Everything felt fast, so I tried doing everything slow, and it did help a bit. When I went to bed, it felt like someone was screaming in my head, and my hands felt full, and puffed up, even though they weren't. Please help. So yeah, kinda similar. But I wanted to make sure a bit, so I made my own post describing what had happened. And thankfully people started to comment, telling me they thought that what I was describing was indeed the fast feeling other people were experiencing too. This is indeed a variation of Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. I think it's just how it manifests in the different senses. I've experienced the shrinking/enlarging feeling, both in terms of my surroundings changing, size, and my body. And I've also experienced what you mentioned about screaming. For me, it was more that every single sound I would hear sounded like someone screaming at the top of their lungs and being furious. Even the sound of my ear brushing against the pillow would sound like the angriest thing ever. I haven't had an experience in a few years now, but I think I've learned to enjoy them in a weird way. As I kept reading through the other users' experiences, I started to feel pretty nice and relieved. Seeing people experience the exact same things I had made me feel less weird for feeling it maybe. Although I had assumed as a kid that it was normal, being unable to find any info about it at first made me begin to doubt if it was all in my head. And it is, but you know what I mean. So, what's happening really? The fast feeling I and many people in that subreddit feel is usually called Tachysensia. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Which is defined by Psychology Today as episodes where everything appears to be speeding up, and sounds become unusually loud. These episodes are short in duration, usually lasting no more than 10 minutes and unpredictable in nature, making them difficult to study. They are known by many names, including quick motion phenomenon, the rushes, rapid spells, and fast feelings. So yeah, exactly what I feel. This is usually associated with the Alice in Wonderland Syndrome, usually just abbreviated by its acronym AIWS, which, according to Wikipedia, is a neurological disorder where people may experience distortions in their visual perception of objects, such as appearing smaller or larger, or appearing to be closer or further away than they are. Although there might also be a distortion in the other senses, including time perception, which leads to a feeling of tachysensia. However, as you can easily notice by looking it up, this topic is very muddy and not necessarily well studied, as, being a randomly triggered temporary mental feeling, it's not really something easy to investigate in real life. Even the Wikipedia page for Alice in Wonderland Syndrome has a warning at the top of the article, and most pages talking about it online are from informal sources. I mean, sorry if I'm wrong, but Psychology Today doesn't really look like an actual professional website, but rather one made for easy access and comprehension. So please take everything in this video with a grain of salt, as I'm not a medical professional, just like a guy. But yeah, due to this lack of substantial research, there's not really a known cause for the feeling, although a lot of people have proposed different theories for it. Checking the subreddit, for example, we can find a post by user u/neuroticsavvy saying, I've had these sensations in middle school. I am 31 now. I came to realize they would happen in situations that were quiet and where I was focusing, like exams. But I was thinking another possible link. I have ADHD and autism. Is anyone else here neurodivergent? Never been officially diagnosed, but I very strongly sense I have ADHD. Just not an easy diagnosis route where I am. Intrigued to know other responses on this if there are any links. Diagnosed ADHD, N24SWD, depression, anxiety, and I scored 25 on the spectrum where 17 is normal functioning and 32 is the average for diagnosed autism. I'm 35 and I rarely have the seizures anymore. I had only one in the last 5 years, which was recent. A mild one, but I could have them 2 to 3 times a year in my youth. Maybe once a year in my 20s? I did get diagnosed and medicated at 32 years old, so that could be a reason for why my recent seizure also happened in a 3-day break to fix tolerance buildup. You might be onto something. Diagnosed ADHD and potential autism. Strongly suspect. And I've been experiencing it all my life, tempted to make a poll for what people are diagnosed with to figure out if there are any correlations. No, I'm not neurodivergent, as far as I know, and I have experienced this, which seems to also be relatively normal. I have no trauma or neurodivergence, and I'm pretty convinced I experienced this. I think it's just a quirk with how some people's brains are wired. But still, it's interesting to think about the relation it might have with tachysensia. Some other people have also suggested it might be hereditary, such as u/Wilmerton, who says in a post, Hey all, just on here, I am now officially flabbergasted, this is not a common thing. Small story here. So, I remember having this feeling quite regularly when I was a kid. I don't know since when. Old enough that I was surprised the first time, but young enough I have the feeling it was always there. I remember talking about it a bit, and that I was told I was just tired. So I classified that in the same bucket as the deja vu impression and other experiences of altered consciousness. I quite like those, so I usually welcomed it as a weird and interesting moment. These episodes got sparser, and I could honestly not say when I had one last. I'm 40. Why am I here then? Well, my daughter just turned 9 and started complaining a few weeks ago. It was quite a shock when I was putting my daughter to bed and she started complaining that everything was going fast. I thought it odd, so I asked a few questions that convinced me she was having an episode. I talked to my wife about it, but she didn't seem to relate. Now my daughter is complaining regularly when going to bed. She actually just came downstairs again now. She's anxious about it, contrary to me. She apparently doesn't enjoy the weirdness, too unusual. So I promised I would look it up. Now, for the first time, she also complained about voices. She's very imaginative and often has difficulty calming her racing thoughts when going to bed. But it's the first time she calls it voices. She said they were faster and louder, I think. Maybe that there were more. Not sure. Anyways, I guess it's just her thoughts going rogue as she was falling asleep, but I thought it was interesting to share. Maybe you experienced a similar feeling. Personally, I don't remember that. This is pretty interesting, as I remember one night I was struggling to fall asleep, and on top of that, started to feel tachysensia. So I went downstairs to tell my dad about it, and he actually told me that it was just because I was tired, and he remembered it happening to him as a child too, so I should just try and rest. Later, a few months ago, the day I had an episode again and started investigating, I asked him about it again, to which he mentioned my grandma has actually also told him it had happened to her in the past, so it being hereditary might actually be true. Meanwhile, what user u/Wilmerton mentions about his daughter is pretty much the angry voices thing I mentioned, and other people in the subreddit have also talked about it. All sounds are loud and fast, but also angry? As the title says, when I have an episode, which have become exceedingly frequent and lengthy in the last year, happening about once a month, sounds and voices in the background and even my own thoughts seem angry at me. It's not like I have voices that are making me angry, more like I'm being yelled at by any small sound. I just wanna know if there's anyone else with that feeling. Distorted inner monologue. I haven't experienced this feeling intensely for a few years. I'm 21 now, but when I was a child/teen, my inner monologue would sound really fast, distorted, angry, and mean. I remember being 16 in a maths exam and working out the equation when the feeling started. And while my pen felt loud and fast and aggressive on the page, like many people here describe, my inner monologue was also very critical of the work I was doing. It sounded very distorted and strange, like myself but not, deeper and just bizarre. I wasn't saying anything actually mean. I think it was just an internal monologue saying everything I was doing. But the tone and my perception of it just sounded aggressive, critical, mean, and angry. That was the only part of it that I really hated. Now, I don't have an inner monologue, so I can't really relate to this one. But the first post describes pretty much what happens to me too. I've also noticed a lot of mixed opinions regarding it, as some people hate it and find it scary, while some find it fun. I tend to just be neutral about it, leaning more towards the latter, but anyways. There are also various triggers mentioned throughout the subreddit, such as a fever, tiredness, which seems to be my case, and even other stuff like epilepsy, which is funny, as while I'm not epileptic, I did have a seizure when I was a really small baby. So who knows? I tried asking various psychologists like teachers, family members, and my therapist about this, but no one seemed to know much about it. The only thing they agree on after they investigate more is that it might be linked to the brain's development, as usually people tend to experience it as a kid, with it going away as they grow up. But it's still something relatively obscure. Yeah, overall this is really weird, but I had been wanting to make a video on it since I realized I had it. So I hope you guys didn't mind this more medical topic and found it interesting. I really recommend you check out the subreddit if you did. It's genuinely very... Wait, I've said interesting too many times already. Fascinating? To read all of the stuff people have experienced and theorized. So it could be a fun rabbit hole to get into if you like that sort of stuff. If any of you have experienced Tachysensia, traditional Alice in Wonderland Syndrome, or even just a similar feeling, please leave it in the comments. It would be really interesting to hear you guys' experiences too. But that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. I'm planning a longer video next month, so it might take a little longer to come out, but please be tuned in, as it's another topic I really want to discuss. So without anything else to say, I better get working on it. Otherwise I'll see you guys in like 6 months for it. So, see you next time. Thanks for watching this.